Welcome to the Startup Passport by eConsulate. Today I'm joined by Daniel Buhagiar. You're the co-founder and CEO of FLASC. Thank you for joining today. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what FLASC is about?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. So FLASC is a startup solving one of the key problems in the energy transition. So we know offshore wind will become a key part of the energy system, but of course it's obvious to ask what happens when there's no wind. So we are developing a technology that can store energy offshore within the wind farm itself, such that it can be delivered when it is needed. And this technology is unique to the offshore environment, so it has very specific features that make it really well suited for marine and offshore applications.
And how did you identify for yourself that there was a need or an opportunity to step into the market for you and for FLASC then?
So it started with more of like an academic problem. It was actually my PhD topic back in Malta, where I'm from originally. At the time, we were looking at power transmission in offshore wind farms, and being in a small island surrounded by the sea, we also had an idea that we wanted to think of how can we use the offshore environment also to be able to stabilize the power and deliver it in a more predictable way. That's where storage came in, and it was initially an academic problem. And then we did some proof of concept, some prototyping, and we started to see interest from industry. And that's when the university decided to spin out a company, and we started looking at commercialization. So it was a bit of like a pull from the market.
Mm-hmm. And now that you also have this academic background, what would you say, what kind of roles do universities or student life, or for you then essentially doing the PhD, what kind of role can that play for entrepreneurs in first developing an idea and then putting it into practice?
So on the development part, I think it's a very nice environment because it's a very safe environment. So you can try ideas if you have the right people around you, the right academics around you. You can be very creative because there's no immediate impact on a profit margin in what you're doing. Whereas maybe if you're in a large company, it's more you have more accountability on whether what you're doing will deliver immediate value or not. So academia can be a nice, safe environment to try to innovate and try to come up with ideas, figure out what works and what doesn't. And in our case, the university played a very active role in the spinning off process because we were also the first spin out to come out of the University of Malta. And they supported us a lot on protecting our IP, setting up the company in the right structure, but also were brave enough to set it up in a foreign jurisdiction. So we set up the company in the Netherlands. One of my co-founders studied at TU Delft, but we also wanted to be close to the North Sea. So they really supported us in that process of finding our feet and getting ready for commercialization.
Does that then also mean that you work in an international team?
Very much so, yes. So I would say we currently have quite a small team and growing, and we have already in a team of 5 people, we have 3 different nationalities. So that's quite interesting. And we see that the sector around us is also a very international space.
Would you say that is something that can help a startup or generally a company if you have an international team, maybe more an international approach that can be, of course, in terms of nationalities, but then also in terms of backgrounds?
Yes, I do think so. It comes down to, as you said, nationalities allow us to see problems in different ways because I think everyone's upbringing and the context in which they are brought up can give them an ability to see things in a different way. So that for me is part of diversity of thought and also educational background. And that can also, I recently had an interesting discussion where we said and you can hire very international people in Delft, but maybe most of them are coming out of TU Delft. So what about getting, they probably studied under the same professor. So even then, diversity has a much broader meaning. And maybe you want to bring in people that studied in a different context or studied different things. And I think that does contribute to the innovation process, yeah.
And now that you're also or already mentioning innovation, how important or essential would you say is innovation in the sector that you're in to stand out and to provide new solutions or also solutions that work in the long run?
I think it's essential. I mean, we are in the midst of an energy transition, which brings new problems and therefore needs new solutions. So to me, that's the most exciting part of the space we're in. We are not trying to improve something. We're trying to come up with something completely new. And we can borrow ideas from other industries. I think with offshore, that's critical, is not to reinvent the wheel. But we're not trying to build a faster horse. We're trying to build a car. It's quite a shift into something completely new. Yeah.
And with what kind of companies or stakeholders do you work on that mission?
So for us, it's very critical to work closely with the supply chain because we are bringing a new idea into a sector that is very risk averse. Offshore operators, companies like oil and gas companies and wind developers, they of course don't like to take risk because it's a very harsh and difficult environment. So we try to bring something new, but we basically put together things that already exist. And to be more specific, for example, pumps have been used offshore in oil and gas for many years. We understand how they work, why they will fail, how to maintain them. So we are basically taking a pump, and in our case, we turn it into a device to convert energy and then be able to store it as a pressurized fluid.
And working in the energy sector, how do you feel about certain restrictions or guidelines that you have to be working with? Those can be maybe set from the governments or in the region where you operate. So do you see them as a boundary, or can they be a boundary for what you're trying to do?
So they can be both. They can be both a boundary, but they can also be something that can promote if it's done in the right way. I think in our case, so all the, let's say, certification and safety related aspects and that come with being in the offshore sector, those are essential and that are a big part of how things need to be. But policy related to, for example, technical criteria in new wind farms, tender criteria, these can really make or break how fast an innovation goes. So if we are building a new wind farm and we say there's a requirement to integrate a certain amount of flexibility or a certain amount of storage, obviously for us that means developers are knocking on the door, there's key interest and makes it very easy. If on the other hand, as there used to be in the UK, there were policies that said if you have a contract to sell energy, which was favorable, like a subsidy contract from a wind farm, and you plug in an energy storage system, then you lose that contract. So you can imagine there for us, it's developers won't even start the conversation. So policy can really have a big impact on accelerating or even blocking certain innovations.
Yeah, makes sense. That will be very interesting to follow in the future. So thank you on these insights on innovation and most importantly, of course, on the company, on FLASC itself. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.